Hi, my name is Christy Briones.
I'm Herb Day.
And we are with the Pasadena Paranormal Research Team. I am one of the co-organizers and also an investigator.
I'm on the research team and I'm also an investigator.
And our main focus is we go out to businesses and private homes and we investigate the paranormal for anyone who is afraid or just doesn't know what's going on. And we'll go in and research and bring all of our equipment, such as...
We use photographic evidence with digital cameras. We'll do EVPs with digital recorders. And we'll also use EMF and millimeters for magnetic field detection.
We also do have a couple of sensitives in our group, Herb and myself being a couple. But there are more.
You can pick up on vibes?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool.
As a matter of fact, here, there is something here, and we've been picking up on it since we got here.
It's messing with me right now.
So, but yeah, we go in, and we just try to help people. That's our main focus, is just try to be there for you and just know that you're not alone and you're not crazy, honestly. And, we're very supportive of our community, and so this is a free service. So if we don't charge anything, if you have any disturbances in your home or you just want to know that you're not crazy, give us a call.
Okay, my name is Olivia Gray. I write under the pen name O.M. Gray, and I write steampunk paranormal romance, steamy steampunk as well. It will get your gears grinding. This is for adults, definitely. Avalon Revisited. My first book is, I'm still so very proud to say, on Amazon's Gothic Romance Top 40 list for over 4 months. This is a newer title. It's a young adult steampunk paranormal romance called The Zombies of Mesmer, and my newest title, which is Caught in the Cogs, and it's a collection of short stories, poetry, and alternative relationship articles. So of these books, the only one that would be appropriate for kids is The Zombies of Mesmer, but also under another name, Christine Rose, I write young adult fantasy with my husband, the Roan of the Wood series. And there are currently 3 books in that series, Roan of the Wood, Witch on the Water, Fire of the Fae, and Power of the Zephyr. Our 4th book will be out here in just a few months.
My name is Tracy McKinley, and I'm a student here at UHCL. I am in the School of Education, and I'm going to school to be an educator of young children. My certifications will be EC through 6, so I'm really interested in learning how we can help children.
Absolutely.
Get interested in something that, other than the traditional genres.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that I used to teach secondary. I used to teach, I've taught 4th grade, junior high, high school. I also teach now in community college. I teach composition, writing. And I think that science fiction fantasy definitely has a place in the classroom. And I think it probably should be used more often. And I think Harry Potter has definitely paved the way for that to happen a little bit more readily these days, where there are college courses being taught, on the whole Harry Potter series. And of course, you've seen that before with, I know when I was teaching 4th grade, I would teach The Hobbit, or you would teach the Chronicles of Narnia, these kind of things, to kind of start getting that imagination going, which I think is even more important these days when so much is just, so much is defined for them. They're not as encouraged to use their own imaginations because everything is already, with the special effects in film today and in TV and with the video games that are so realistic. All that is already made for them. They don't have to use their own imagination. And that's where we can look at, in reading, with just words on a page, they have got to really conjure up a lot of these images and fill in the blanks themselves. And so it really really kind of sparks the imagination. So I really think that that is one way that we can really use science fiction, fantasy, and steampunk in in education, you know, for young adults. And is it Tracy?
Yes.
Tracy has some really wonderful questions
Yes.
that she's prepared, so we'll go with that.
I grew up in the 60s. I grew up with like the Wild Wild West show. But when I first heard the term steampunk, I had no idea what it was. So I had to ask. And I did a little research on it. But a lot of parents my age have no idea what it is. So when we go to introduce these concepts, this genre to parents, what are your thoughts on the best way to introduce that instead of just bringing up, oh, do you remember the Wild Wild West show from way back when?
Well, you're not alone. I mean, most people, steampunk hasn't really kind of tipped into mainstream yet, and so most people still don't know what it is or what that term refers to. The term was coined in the late 80s, or excuse me, in the early 80s by Jeter, and the reason it's called steampunk is because it's a subset of science fiction fantasy genre set in the Victorian era where all the technology is powered by clockwork or by steam. That's the name steampunk, with kind of an edgy punkiness, you know, to it. As far as introducing it, how to introduce it to kids in the classroom, I think definitely take the route of like the maker do-it-yourself route, where they could take cast-off junk and materials and whatever, and they turn it into something just amazing. Last year at this convention, Airship Isabella was here, who's probably the most well-known steampunk airship in the South, maybe in the entire country, but definitely in the South Central area. And that's what they do, and that's what's so much of the driving force behind the steampunk movement is about. What people are drawn to first is the aesthetic. Everyone loves the aesthetic. And then through the aesthetic, they find the literature, and they find the music, and they find, you know, and what I think is one of the most beautiful things about steampunk and the steampunk culture, the steampunk community, is that maker philosophy, you know, where everyone becomes an artist, everyone is able to express themselves, and with, you know, you can take the whole environmental aspect of it, you take junk and turn it into something beautiful. And that's one of the draws as well, is like you look at like technology today, and it's, you know, plastic and smooth, and there's nothing terribly special about it, it's nothing very beautiful about it. But you look at technology from the Victorian era, and everything was just such beautiful craftsmanship to last. I mean, there are pocket watches that still work from 100, 150 years ago. You know, and so there was that idea of beauty and utility together. And so you can, you know, come at it from that. I mean, even in the classroom, because are you going to be teaching like what level?
Anywhere between, I teach kindergarten all the way up to 6th grade.
Okay, so really young kids. Okay, yeah. So those could be like little projects, you know, that they could do, and that can introduce them to steampunk.
Very good. Sounds like you could incorporate literature and little
absolutely.
science and.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You could kind of go across the board. Definitely literature and science. You can incorporate into steampunk, absolutely. And I think there's probably a lot of fun little experiments that you could do that could kind of pull in the steampunk. Like, unfortunately, with film, there really isn't yet. There aren't many examples. Like Hugo, the recent film Hugo, had a steampunk feel, but it was much, much more diesel punk because of the era that it was set in. And the new Sherlock Holmes films have, you know, a sprinkling, have a steampunk feel as well, but they're really not for kids, you know. And then the old Wild Wild West, I guess, the TV show, and then was the film, and then like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is another really awful. Unfortunately, the movies that are mostly steampunk are really awful films, with the exception of the few that have come out in the last couple of years.
What about the Golden Compass?
The Golden Compass. Oh, the Golden Compass is a great example.
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, and so we could, and I think I hope that we're gonna see more steampunk themed films coming out this year and next year as steampunk really starts to tip.
There's a lot more of them in the anime field too, aren't there?
Well, anime is where, see, I don't know a whole lot about anime. I'm not into anime per se, but that's my understanding is how steampunk has gotten as big as it got, is that it was riding in anime. And of course, Girl Genius. The Girl Genius is I guess, a multi-Hugo winning, award-winning comic book series, and that's a very, very steampunk series.
Comic books are great to draw into the classroom also.
I think so.
So, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it could get them reading, and they think it's fun because it's not like just blocks and blocks of words on a page.
Exactly.
There's lots of pictures to go along with it. So I think, anything that's getting them reading and getting their imagination going, it's not a bad thing.
I agree. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Many parents firmly believe that their children should not be exposed to sci-fi or horror, or they just have an uneasy feel about it. So, do you have any ideas on the best way to introduce not only the young children themselves, but to their parents to the idea of allowing their children to participate in activities within the classroom, like maybe during an open house where the children aren't, so they feel free to be expressive themselves?
The whole, with the whole science fiction fantasy thing, especially in the culture like we have here in some of the cities in Texas, which have a tendency to be more conservative and be more fundamentalist, is that it might be a hard sell. Because when they hear horror, they hear science fiction, and they hear these things, their mind goes to someplace evil, dark and evil, and devil worshippers, and these whatever. And so I think by introducing them to science fiction, fantasy, even horror that they already know and are incorporated into their life, the less controversial ones, the stuff that's not quite as dark. That could be a really good way to do it. And you could even start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's fantasy. It's fantasy based. It's based on Christianity. Really. And so with Aslan as a representation of Christ. So you could introduce it, especially if you're talking with very Christian fundamentalist parents. Introduce fantasy that way. It's like, look, this entire book is an analogy. But it's fantasy. This is fantasy. Not all fantasy is this. Witches and because a lot of people with Harry Potter, oh my God, witchcraft. And just kind of it's about education. It's about educating them around these Hollywood stereotypes of what witches are and what a pentagram is. And so you could take a more historical slant of it. You could take or start with these things that are like right down the line of Christianity. That is a perfect example to start with Lewis's work, because he was a devout Christian and he wrote beautiful fantasy.
Great idea. As a future educator, and I understand how fantasy literature can be used in the classroom to help children understand life. When they see somebody else in a fantasy world going through a difficult time, it helps them understand that, one thing, it helps them feel more safe in their environment, but it also helps them understand that certain situations are not so bad. So what advice do you have for an educator on how to use the sci-fi?
As in any fiction, and I guess definitely with sci-fi fantasy, or maybe even because there's just that extra layer of distance, is that it can be a way to address some really difficult issues. And not only, on how to deal with them, but just in letting them know that they're not alone, which is huge. On my blog, I write a lot about relationship issues and a lot about abusive situations and getting out of relationships with love and respect, or just, dealing with whatever. And I can't tell you the amount of readers I've picked up just because of those articles. And it started as a catharsis for me and what I was some of the things that I was going through personally a year ago. But it has gained me so many readers for no other reason than because they can identify with it. Because they're going through it too, or they know somebody, or they have felt this way, or can't tell you the number of comments or emails I've gotten. It's like, this is exactly what I needed to read today. This is exactly what I'm feeling. And so if they can, if there are things that are issues that they may be dealing with at home, that they're afraid to talk about, or they're embarrassed to talk about, or they're, and they can read about it in a book, then they know, number one, they're not alone. They're not all alone dealing with this thing by themselves. There are other people who deal with it, and not only these characters in the book, but the author who had to write about this, and sometimes just knowing that you are not the only one dealing with this or feeling this pain or feeling scared or feeling whatever goes so far. And so I think it can definitely, you know, be kind of broached in that way.
Some children think so literally that they have a difficult time believing or allowing themselves to enjoy the fantasy process as they're reading certain literatures. So what ideas do you have, activities or something that not only teachers but parents at home can do with their children to allow their children to expand the way they're thinking so that they're not thinking so literally about what they're reading?
Well, an activity that just popped to mind which we could do, and it would be something that could also kind of help develop that imagination that I think is, like I said earlier, is very, it's kind of been stifled because so much is defined for them. I did an exercise with another author at a steampunk convention a couple weeks ago in California. That was a very interesting exercise. Now, it would have to be altered for kids that age, but I think the same thing could work, is that he would give us like a line, a couple of lines at the beginning of a story, and then one author had to carry it for 3 minutes, and then I had to pick it up for 3 minutes, and then an audience member picked it up, and so we would write this story together. And every person, you know, when it went from this one author to me to an audience member to another audience member, every storytelling technique was different. Where we went with the story was different, and so it was really interesting to see how our imaginations worked differently. And so you could do something like that, to where like in groups, you know, especially kids that age in groups, they could come up with these things. You could give them a, you can give them a an object and have them describe what this does, or maybe not even show them the object, just let them reach behind a curtain and feel it, and then they've got to imagine what that is and what it does, and you know, and you can even define some kind of world, you know, that it's going to be in. And so it starts to get their imaginations going, and then by being able to play off of each other and talk about it, you know, then that's part of the creative process sometimes, you know, is collaborating with peers. And so that could probably be a fun activity. I think when in dealing with science fiction fantasy, you know, if you're talking about like introducing them to literature that they may not believe, really instead of going far into something like that, say The Hobbit, you know, where it's a completely different universe, different world, different everything, start with something that's a little bit closer to home, that is based in our reality, like an urban fantasy, something that's based in our reality where they recognize at least part of the world, and then you have these little fantastic elements. Which is kind of like in our Rowan of the Woods series, what we do is that it's based in our world, but you know, if you turn the right corner or pick up the right stick, it might be a magic wand. You know, and then so magic, it's like it's there, not everyone sees it all the time, but if you're in the right place at the right time, you just might. And so that kind of helps, you know, it builds on something that they already know and gets their imagination going that way.
Steampunk presents an interesting alternative reality in which electricity is mostly non-existent and technology runs almost solely on steam. So what are some other alternative sources that, has anybody ever thought about, or is that like just like a traditional?
Well, steampunk, the reason it's called steampunk is, of course, because most everything runs on steam, and because it was set in that era, where there was electricity. I mean, you know, it had been invented, but it just wasn't the primary source of power. There was also, of course, clockwork and machinations and so forth.
Which is springs and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That, you know, that kind of technology worked as well. Now, if you want to go into other eras, you know, like when things started being powered primarily on diesel, that's what's known as diesel punk, and that was more in the World War I era.
Yes.
I think that steampunk is starting to incorporate all these other ones like cyberpunk and diesel punk and whatever punk. You know, it's all kind of being under the umbrella steampunk, because steampunk seems to be the term that's stuck. And so it's kind of, it's starting to come out of the Victorian era a little bit. It's starting to have the aesthetic and the feel, even if it's in a different universe or a different time period or whatever. And so, I mean, really it's just as the limitations are only one's imagination as to what can power it. Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were talking about coming out into other eras, so it is possible, like steampunk usually is in the Victorian era, so it is possible for it to be used in like the feudal Japan and the Renaissance.
Well,
era.
it's getting to that point, you know, especially with time travel.
Yes.
Because time travel is a really big theme in steampunk. you know, with Wells' Time Machine, right? And so you can definitely go to those places, but up until now, like I said, I think things are really starting to be all encompassed under the steampunk umbrella, but it's been in that era or a world that's very similar in look and feel to that era, and that's why it was called steampunk. I mean, if it was in feudal Japan or in Renaissance, it would be, you know, it would be something else. So Elizabethan punk, you know,
Yeah,
or Genghis Khan punk. Khan punk, that's it. Yeah. So, but I think it's starting to kind of be all encompassed. So you can take you can take the essence of steampunk and that maker culture with the kind of edgy, punky element, put it in any historical time period using the technology that was available at the time and just having a little edge to it, have a little punkiness, you know, to it.
It's great imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So do we have any questions?
No, those are some great questions. Thank you for bringing those.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as far as like I mean, if you're looking for new things to read for young adults, of course you got my book, Zombies of Mesmer, which is definitely for teens. You know, it's not for that age. No, not for that age. There's a wonderful book named Thomas Riley by Nick Valentino, which is a very much a science fiction, technology-based steampunk adventure story for young adults. That is lovely, really great book. Let's think what else for young adult steampunk. Of course, there's Bone Shaker. If you're familiar with Sherry's Priest, Bone Shaker and Dreadnought, and the third book, which name escapes me, it's great for young adult. And as far as, oh my goodness, I can't think of anything new. I'm sure there's so many steampunk things coming out now. There's got to be more. I mean, I know there are more for young adults specific, and for young reader or for middle grade or young readers though, I don't know.
There seems to be a trend. I know young people now, from junior high all up until 25 to 30, are really drawn to the steampunk.
Oh yeah,
And
steampunk's.
It's gotten.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's almost like
Oh, it's exploding.
exploded.
It's exploding.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's been kind of slowly ramping since the 80s, but it's been really low until I would say about, what is this, 2012, 2008, 2009 is when I first heard the term steampunk. And that's because at that time I was looking for an agent, and every agent in New York was looking for steampunk.
Oh, I see.
And I'm like, steampunk, what is steampunk? And so I looked it up and just fell in love with the aesthetic, as people generally do. It's the thing that first, draws them to it. And that's when I actually decided this story that I've been wanting to write about Arthur Tudor. I was like, okay, that's where I'm putting him. I'm putting it in a steampunk romance world. And part of it was because it was ramping up. So it was a marketing experiment actually that I go over in the book that I wrote as Christine, the Publishing and Marketing Realities for the Emerging Author Bill. I talk about the marketing experiment of Olivia and this and why I chose steampunk, and a lot of it is because it's this subgenre that is it was just growing and growing and growing. And in since 2009, 2010, the book was out, an agent found me. I didn't have to look for an agent anymore. An agent found me because I had a steampunk book, and that's what the buzz was all about, steampunk. And then, and since 2010, so this is 2 years later, we have gone from having countrywide, having 2 steampunk specific, like steampunk exclusive conventions to over 20 this year. Yeah, so it's exploding, and now you're seeing it starting to cross over to mainstream. When there was a castle episode, the steampunk castle episode, which was awesome. Yeah. You're starting to see it in films. Justin Bieber did a steampunk Christmas video, so it's really close to being a household term now.
I agree.
And so, yeah, I think this year and next year, and if I'm really lucky, 2014, you're going to see steampunk really kind of, surfing right along the top there of mainstream. And then there's probably going to take a very, very quick nosedive after that as they go into the next whatever thing that mainstream's interested in. Yeah. But those on the fringe, the punks, that really built this movement, they'll still be punks even after that.
Yes,
they'll still be steampunks after that.
Absolutely.
Well, I was going to add, the comic book steampunk came out in 2000, 1999-2000 period, and was very popular. I worked at a comic book store at that time. And then, of course, there's the online comic books like Girl Genius.
Yeah, Girl
and stuff
Genius.
like that really kind of awesome.
Yeah, Girl Genius, I mentioned it earlier, multi-Hugo award-winning Girl Genius, yeah. Yeah, and those are the things, and even with anime, as we talked about earlier, how that really kind of helped it ramp up. And so, I mean, it's been like slowly building for 20 years, but in the last 3, it's shot up. Yeah, and I think it's going to tip this year or next year in the mainstream, and then it's going to probably go down pretty quickly. I mean, it's still among the geeks, and among the steampunks, and about, you know, it's still going to be popular, just like vampires never go away.
Yes.
You know, but
Yes.
they come in and out of fashion.
Yes.
But they never go away, and there are vampire fans. I'm a huge vampire fan, no matter if vampires are popular or sparkly or not.
Yes.
You know, but it tips, and then it's like, oh, I'm sick of vampires, and until for another 10 years, and then vampires will be all the rage again.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I think one of the things that about for young kids that would be neat to get them into are like the old-fashioned fairy tales, not the kind
That's
that's
a great idea.
sanitized like Disney. But if you
Oh.
go back and look at the old ones, like Hansel and Gretel,
Talk about horror.
or
Oh, that's
Cinderella.
exactly
Talk
right.
about horror. That's a
Was it
great way to introduce
Cinderella. The
horror.
first version I read of that, the stepsisters cut off their toes and their heels
Yeah,
to fit into
to
the
fit into
slippers.
shoes. Yeah, I mean the original fairy tales are horrific.
And
Oh,
the
yes.
one
that's
reason,
true.
well, this
That's
is
true.
way back when I took it in college, the professor said, you know, the reason they did that, or not did that, but the reason they evolved that way is because it was a way to teach the kids, you know, life's scary. And these are some of the things that happen. And, you know, it's to kind of keep
You know-
them home, but let them get exposed to that sort of thought early.
That
That's
could
exactly
be fun,
right.
is to take the Disney version and take the original version and compare them.
Little Mermaid
Yes.
is my biggest
Oh,
one
scary,
for me
yeah.
because I hate the Disney version because it teaches you if you give everything about you away, you can give the good.
Have the prince.
You can have the prince at the end. And the original Little Mermaid, she doesn't. You know,
Uh-huh.
she gives it all up, and she doesn't get the prince.
She doesn't get the guy?
And she dies of a broken heart. You know.
That's much more accurate, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
right.
that's the
I
one I
agree.
grew up on, and then I saw the Disney version. I was like, no,
No, that's
not
right.
That's not the way
Well,
it ended.
Disney has done. I mean, I've never been like a fan of Mickey Mouse and so forth, but like the parks, I love the parks. I mean, especially the one in California. It's just magical. Just to set foot in that place is magical. But I think Disney and their take on the fairy tales have done so much damage to women in our culture. Oh my God, so much damage, because we all grow up thinking that a prince is going to come and sweep us away, and we live happily ever after, and this man is going to solve all our problems. And not only does it, you know, really set up women for a lot of heartache, but it sets up men for a lot of freaking pressure, you know? And so I think that, you know, by looking at that, going, look, this is what it's turned into, and maybe it's speaking to some of those things, and then looking at the originals, yeah, absolutely, because I remember my mother saying this with, this is some of the problem that pop culture has, is when she was a girl, and you know, after TV was, because she was born in 42, and so they didn't have TVs until the 50s, like somewhere in the 50s, right? They would watch like Ozzie and Harriet or whatever shows those were, where it was like the mother always looked picture perfect, and dinner was always this, and everybody was, and she thought that her family was the only family ever, anywhere, that wasn't like that.
Yes.
And that their family, there was something wrong with her and something wrong with her parents because they were not that picture perfect. And that's back to what I was saying at the beginning. When you know that you're not the only one, you know, and so if all they're reading are these wonderful fairy tales, and these kids are going home to their parents screaming at each other, they think they're the only ones whose parents didn't have the happily ever after maybe, you know. And so when you start to look at some of this, then you're like, you know what? No, this is life.
Yeah.
You're not the only one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about, you know, teaching people about people being different and going through stuff. I'm bad with names today. I can't remember anything, but I remember I saw this movie in school, and it was about, you know, just into the future. It was a movie about a colony. I can't remember if it was Mars or Venus, but it was raining all the time. It rained all the time, and the sun only came out on, you know, maybe every 10 years or something like that. And And there's one little girl, she was just so different. Everybody made fun of her. She, she was fantasizing about this one day. And then the other kids lock her up for that one day when the sun was out and the flowers are out. And they all go out and they're enjoying it. And then they feel guilty afterwards, like, oh my goodness, we locked her in, she missed all of it. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, that was a big kind of moral lesson for me in high school. It's like, oh, that's what happens sometimes when we stigmatize the person who's different.
Absolutely, absolutely. I read that book. Read the story. Can't remember. The girl's name was Margaret. It was set on Venus.
That's it, Venus. That's it.
I can't remember it. That was a short story.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially with the as much as bullying has been in the news over the past couple of years, which it's finally someone is like shining a light and saying this is not okay to treat other people like this. There was who told me this? What's a wonderful exercise to do with kids, I think, is that take a piece of paper, a nice flat beautiful piece of paper. Have you heard this exercise? You guys? A nice beautiful flat piece of paper, and tell them to crumple it up. And as they're crumpling it up and they're smashing it and they're jumping on it and they're doing all these things with it, you're telling them how every time that you call somebody a name or you treat somebody, this is what you're doing to them. And now you make it flat and all pretty again, and it will never be as flat or as pretty or as whatever again because of what you do, the things that you say to people. And when you're mean to people, it damages them permanently.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think it's a very, very powerful exercise to do.
Yes.
Because I know people, I'm 42, and I will not go to a high school reunion. You can't pay me to go back to those people, I'll tell you right now. High school was miserable for me. School was miserable for me. I was always the weird one. I was always the outcast. I was always the, and it's damaged me for life.
Yeah.
Obviously it made me the woman, it's part of what made me the woman that I am. But it was a lot of pain that I think was probably not necessary. And I see kids going through the same thing. And I've met people who are 12 years younger than me, and they're still hung up stuff that's happened in high school, and it's damaging, and it's not necessary.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I heard another analogy similar to that. You have them drive a nail in a piece board. This is your angry words. This is your hurtful words. You drive it in. Well, you can take those words back. So you pull out the nail. So you've taken it back, and they might have forgiven you.
Yeah, but
you
there's a
see
hole.
the scar.
The hole's
The
still
scar
there.
will
Yeah.
never go away.
It'll never go away. That's
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think those are really powerful exercises because it's visual and tactile, for them to see what isn't,
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, so those are kind of very important things, and you can even use that, kind of in corporation with stories, because you've got, you can even look at Harry Potter, and the things that Malfoy, and Malfoy's, he's mean, guy, and the things that they do, and the things that some of the Slytherins do, and it's not okay to treat people.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think fantasy can definitely help with those things.
Yes. Very good points.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it can also not be good. I think we were talking about this earlier in the feminist panel, that we were talking about how Bella's character is just kind of empty.
Yeah.
And she has to be fulfilled by these men who are fighting over,
Oh, absolutely.
And so
Well, depending on the book, of course. There are books that aren't going to teach the right lessons, just like we were talking about, like the Disney ones. Yeah, because in Bella, I am not a big fan of the Twilight series. I read the first 3 books, and I read most of the 4th one, but I couldn't. I got to within 200 pages of that gazillion-page freaking book, and just goes, I don't care. I don't care what happens in the next 250 pages. And I was done, and I had to force myself through that 4th book anyway. But the first one I enjoyed enough to go and pick up the 2nd one and the 3rd one. And by the 2nd one I enjoyed as well. The 3rd one, it was they were all really, I think, rather overwritten. But growing up, being, believing this kind of prince is going to sweep you off your feet and really loving the vampire mythos and the vampire romance and stuff, I identify with Bella.
Wow.
And it's not a good thing to be able to identify with Bella. Not a good thing to be able to know what it's like to lose yourself so much in another person that when he leaves, you are literally a ball of on a forest floor and you can't even get up, okay? That's not a good thing to be able to identify with, you know, but I think that it is often very realistic, you know, and it can be used to teach the opposite. You need to be a person on your own, not just an extension of this other person. You know, because I think still far too many women, I was just listening to, on the drive here today from Austin, I was listening to Savage Love podcast.
Can we get a picture for the paper?
Of course. You want me to pose or you want me to keep talking?
Keep talking.
Okay. I was listening to this, okay. I was listening to the Savage Love podcast.
Oh, okay.
And are you guys familiar with Savage Love? Okay. It's Dan Savage who does a...
They've already gotten pictures.
It's Dan Savage who does like a sex advice column, and he does a podcast on it now. And so he was talking about how women in our culture, they are taught to be submissive and deferential to men. That's how we're taught in everything that happens. It's like if you're familiar with Ishmael, the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, which is one of the books that just changed my life when I was about 25. He talks about something called mother culture. And it's not even something that someone has to teach you, you know, in words or in pictures. It's pervasive. It's everywhere. It's in every television show, in every magazine, in every book, and it's under, you know. And so that's what people are learning in our culture. That's what women are learning, to be submissive and to be deferential. And that's what you see in Bella. You know, so I think that Bella is a sadly all too accurate portrayal of a teenage girl in love. You know, and right or wrong, that's realistic, you know, and so you can use that to kind of teach the other way, to teach about, you know, strength and so forth, because I think that's just, you know, just by saying, feminism, you should, but yeah, that's not going to help anybody if that's how they feel. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're like when they fall in love.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes. Say love is blind.
Yeah.
Everything goes out the window.
Yeah, I know it. I've been blinded by love more than a few times.
Guys too.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it is men and women. We all, you know, we sometimes get lost into. I'm someone who
you need a picture of her too.
I insisted on being on my own for so many years. So I'm living with a guy because
Smile. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, you know, and we have these gender stereotypes, you know, where we forget that, you know what, men, that's what
she is too.
They're sensitive and they're, you know, they fall in love too, but you know, but so many men, of course, so many men also be gay. So many men, you know, are portrayed as, as just these jerks. I mean, a lot of men are jerks, but a lot of them aren't. Yeah. Yeah.
No, but what I was going to say is that, you know, I've embraced this whole, I love reading the books with a strong female character.
Yeah, yeah.
And I moved with my boyfriend, and I didn't even realize when I started doing it. I started doing all those mothering cultural things.
Yep.
Until one day I got very upset, and I told him, I can't believe I'm doing all this stuff. And he goes, I didn't ask you to.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to. You just started doing it.
That's right, because it's, first of all, I think it's part of our just feminine nature to be nurturing a lot of times. Because I know I'm a very, very nurturing woman. And to be loving and nurturing, it certainly is more for women to be than men, although there are loving and nurturing men, of course. But it is perpetuated by our culture in ways that we cannot define or point to or say, this is where it is. It's just part of mother culture. Yeah, so I think when things reflect that, yeah, totally use it.
It's been like that for a long time.
Oh, of course.
You think back movies, like you said,
Absolutely.
you know, like Leave It Be. Remember, she was a stay-at-home mom. She did everything. She came into the house.
That's right. She always looked perfect. There.
Yeah.
Always
Remember,
perfect.
she didn't pay the bills. He went in his little
That's right.
office and shut the door while he paid bills, and nobody's allowed to bother him. But yeah, mother's one that took care of everybody. That was her job. So I think we, especially my age, grew up, you know, and that.
Absolutely.
So
You grew up in the 60s?
I did. I was born in '62, so I'm a '60s,
Okay.
'70s child.
Yeah, well, me too. I was born in 69. So mostly grew up in the 70s, you know, so you're a few years older than me, 7 years older than me. But yeah, you know, that's what we learned. And I don't know what they're learning now, but I'm sure it's not too terribly different. I mean, I know that you can see also in pop culture what things have become acceptable in culture. you know, with shows like Modern Family and stuff, you know, where you see a lot of almost every show. I mean, I don't watch all that much TV, but almost every drama and every sitcom has a gay couple.
Yes,
And I'm just like, damn time. I mean, it's about damn time, honestly.
Yeah.
It's about damn time. But, you know, it's gotten to the point where it is accepted by society enough that they're no longer the punchline of a joke.
Exactly.
They are part of
They're part of the
life.
community.
Yeah, they're part of a community. They have children, and they're, yeah. And I think it's beautiful because, you know, as someone who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, we remember when it wasn't like that.
Yes.
You know, we remember when you could be killed, you know, for saying something like that. So, and so it's wonderful to finally see that. And I think that, you know, and the more, but there was a lot of fight that took them, you know, to get them to that place, to get that part of society accepted by a culture as a whole. Just like was the with race back in the 60s, you know, it was kind of both before our times really, but you know, when that was the big social issue of the time, you know, was that, I think, and now with gay marriage, that is the big civil rights issue of our time.
That's right.
Is and our, I mean, I don't have children, but if I had children, like my sister's kids, who are like now 12 and 9, when they're out of college, when they're getting ready to get married and have kids, you know, and then their kids, they're going to grow up in a world that they're going to say, what? You mean they couldn't get married? How ridiculous! That's unheard of. And it's yay, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's wonderful to kind of see that happening. And I think the same thing can go with the strength of women. One of the big issues in our culture is that we are so predominantly Judeo-Christian, and they are pretty misogynistic religions. You know, you look, if you read the Bible and you look at, you know, kind of, that it's pretty misogynistic, and so you've got to kind of get past a lot of that religious fundamentalism to get past some of these, you know, really inherent misogynistic thoughts and tendencies and so forth. You know, which is going to be a hard sell in Texas especially, but in this entire country. And it's a very fundamentalist country, so yeah. So that might take a little bit longer, but we're getting there. Yeah, we do, but we do, and we're getting there. And I mean, I know that Savage talks a lot about, you know, how fewer and fewer young couples are even getting married. You know, there are a lot of alternative lifestyles, a lot of and more of this is being accepted. You know, and I think it's just beautiful, good, and I think pop culture, including written fantasy, is going to help that along.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know what? It probably, yeah, you're right. It probably was there's been non-traditional families, non-traditional lifestyles, but fantasy, sci-fi especially.
Yeah.
You know, that really kind of, you know, opened ground for people to think about.
Absolutely.
Robert
absolutely.
Heinlein.
Yeah, Heinlein, yeah.
Heinlein, is he the one that wrote the Poly Community, right? Was that Heinlein? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, and that's, I think, in polyamory, you know, it's an alternative lifestyle that I write a lot about in my blog.
And when you're a young kid, if you're exposed to that stuff, you don't, unless your parents have really been like, da 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 da, this is the way it has to be. But when you read it, you're like, people can be that way?
Yeah.
Okay, and then it makes, I think it made me a lot more open when I got older and I met gay people. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, 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 and it can, yeah, because unless you're taught prejudice, you're not actually prejudiced. Yeah, that's right. You know, unless you're taught this is wrong, you're not gonna think this is wrong. You think this is the way it is. You know, yeah, and so it's wonderful when you can write that into a fantasy world. In fact, I'm thinking in my next novel to do that, to in the world to write where basically polyamory is the norm. You know, where there is not a limit to love. You know, and you're not, and so I'm thinking about doing that as because I write about it a lot in my blog and so forth, so it would fit. But yeah, and I think that there's going to come a time where people are going to be not as judgmental about alternative relationships, whether that is a non-monogamous one, whether it's a homosexual one, whether it's one that, you know, whatever is, you know, people are going to say, you know what, hey, that's wonderful, that works for you.
Are you
Good
happy?
for you. That's
That's
right. If you're happy, if you're fulfilled, if you're, yeah. And there's not, that's one thing I could never understand about homosexuality from, even when I was in high school, even before, even before I really understood what it was, you know, because I grew up in Huntsville and like, is, you know, because my best friend, and one of the reasons we are still best friends 25 years later, is because he came out to me. And in Huntsville, Texas in 1987, you know, when it was scary. And he was distraught,
Exactly.
you know, and I embraced him and told him, there's nothing wrong with you. And what did I know? I was 17, you know, but, you know, I was like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. It's perfectly natural. And I did not know anything more than I knew him. And I knew that he was not evil, and that he was not, you know, going to burn in hell forever because he liked boys instead of girls. You know, I was like, this is perfectly natural. And so because of that, you know, we like had this bond, but I also was never strictly taught, oh my God, this is blah, blah, blah. You know, I didn't hear that every day. I didn't grow up in a fundamentalist Baptist. I mean, we were Catholic, and we were fairly strictly Catholic, but we didn't, you know, just didn't talk about that stuff. But, you know, and I think, and actually pop culture helped me a lot too, because I was a big fan of Erasure. And if any of you know Erasure, Andy Bell, who's the singer of Erasure, is the most flamboyant, delicious man who has like ever walked the planet. And so, and he just kind of really opened me up to the concept of very being flamboyantly homosexual. And I'm just like, it's kind of cool, you know? And so, but one thing I never understood, getting back to my point, is that why people get so bent out of shape about it. Like really, it doesn't affect anybody else. It doesn't affect anybody. I mean, what you do, your partner, with another consenting adult, whatever you do, is nobody's business but yours and theirs, you know? And so why people got so bent out of shape about it, I still don't understand. I still do not understand how it threatens family, how it threatens marriage, and I'm just like, whatever. Yeah, so it really comes down to, and I think the more we can point this out and, you know, show this is also the better, is that it comes down to the fears. It comes down to a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding. And a lot of, I don't understand it, so therefore it must be evil. You're going to burn in hell forever.
Yeah.
For the rest of eternity. Yeah, because that's not the way I think. And so if you can teach diversity and you can think that, you know, different things work for different people. No one is really right or wrong. Right. No one is being hurt. You're not abusing someone else. You're not forcing someone to do, you know. Different things work for different people. Yeah.
That's an awfully hard lesson to teach.
It is. It is.
So I think it's good to start young, like
Yeah,
in
it is.
children's literature with the fantasy, because it introduces not so much concept of sexuality or anything, but being accepting of somebody else's lifestyle.
Well, lifestyle can be whatever.
Than
I mean, you can even teach it from very basic things, like give them a choice between milk chocolate and dark chocolate and white chocolate, and see who chooses what. Now, are you any better than you because you like white chocolate and you like dark chocolate? It's just a preference. You know, it's just a preference. It doesn't really make any difference. It just, you like the taste of this better, you like the taste of this better.
Yes.
You know, and you can go and go from there. You know, from the kind of candy you choose. Does it make them any less than you? Does it make them any more than you? You like something different.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Have any more questions?